Welcome to CrimePod Castle, to our Twisted Love series. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a case that shook Chandigarh, India, back in 2012.
Yeah.
The Kiran Choudhary Stalking Case.
No.
This story is just such a stark reminder of how, twisted desires and obsession can lead to really devastating consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what makes this case particularly unsettling is how it really shatters this perception that a lot of people have of stalking,
Yeah.
where it's viewed as a nuisance or something that's just annoying.
Right.
But this case really throws light on the very real threat it poses
Yeah.
and how easily it can escalate into violence, ending tragically as it did for Kiran.
And it's just so heartbreaking to think about what she went through.
Yeah.
She was a bright, cheerful 21-year-old college student.
Yeah.
Everyone who knew her described her as ambitious, kind, just full of life.
Right.
It's just really hard to grasp how someone so full of potential could become the victim of such a senseless crime.
I think it really underscores the fact that anyone can become a victim of stalking, right? It doesn't discriminate based on age, background, anything like that.
Right.
And it really just shatters the lives of not just the victim, but their families and communities as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the person who committed this horrific crime. The stalker.
Yeah.
Akash Singh.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about him and his relationship with Kiran?
Well, Akash was 25 years old, lived in Kiran's neighborhood. He had dropped out of college. And what's really disturbing is that they barely knew each other.
Wow.
They had very little interaction. And
Yeah.
yet he became completely fixated on her.
That's so chilling. I mean, it's not even like this was a case of, a relationship gone wrong or a bitter ex or anything like that.
Yeah.
This was a complete stranger who developed this dangerous obsession with her.
Mm.
So what can psychology tell us about how something like this happens? How does someone cross that line from casual interest or maybe just noticing someone to this level of dangerous fixation?
Right. Well, I think that's a complex question, and there's no one single answer. But oftentimes, stalking stems from this very deep-seated need for control and power. And I think it's very possible that in Akash's case, his initial attraction towards Kiran just transformed into this obsession, a delusion, where he believed he had some sort of right over her, And as he continued to observe her from afar, this delusion probably just grew stronger and stronger.
Yeah, it's terrifying to think that, someone's mind could work that way. And from the information we have, his behavior escalated pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, it did. It started with, I guess you could say, seemingly harmless acts, like just noticing her in the neighborhood. But quickly, his actions grew more intrusive and threatening.
Yeah.
He began following Kiran's daily routines, loitering outside her college, sending her these unwanted messages, and even appearing uninvited at her family gatherings.
So she wasn't just passively accepting this behavior, right? She was trying to protect herself.
Oh, absolutely. Kiran did everything you're supposed to do in these situations. She ignored his advances, she blocked him on social media, and confided in her friends and family about what was happening. She even tried reasoning with him, asking him to leave her alone.
Wow.
It's this common misconception that victims somehow invite this kind of attention.
Yeah.
And I think Kiran's case clearly demonstrates that that's simply not true.
You raise a really important point. I mean, stalking is never the victim's fault.
Yeah.
But it's also really crucial to understand that ignoring a stalker doesn't always work sometimes. As was sadly the case with Kiran, it can actually escalate the situation.
Right.
So why is that?
Well, stalkers at their core are really driven by this need for control. And when those attempts to control are met with resistance, it can actually further fuel their obsession.
Okay.
And make them more determined to assert dominance. And then when that need for control turns into rage, the consequences can be devastating.
That's a really terrifying thought. And tragically, this is exactly what happened with Kiran on August 5th, 2012. Akash's obsession turned deadly. Can you walk us through the events of that horrific day?
Well, that evening, Kiran was walking home from her coaching classes.
Okay.
It was a route she took every day, just a quiet lane near her house, a place you'd think would be safe,
Right.
But Akash was waiting for her. Witnesses later described hearing raised voices, a desperate struggle.
It's just so chilling to imagine, even in a place that should have felt safe, close to her home, She couldn't escape his obsession.
Right, and I think the choice of location is often significant in these cases, you know.
Yeah.
It's not just about opportunity, it's about power and control.
Yeah.
By choosing a location where Kiran felt vulnerable, I think Akash was really trying to demonstrate his dominance, his ability to reach her anywhere, anytime.
So what happened next? What led to the attack itself?
Well, from the witness accounts and Akash's later confession, we know that Kiran's repeated rejection of his advances just sent him into a rage.
Yeah.
And sadly, this is a pattern we see way too often in cases of violence against women. The perpetrator's fragile ego can't handle rejection, and it leads to this loss of control and an eruption of violence.
And in Kiran's case, that violence was absolutely brutal.
It was Akash, in a fit of rage, pulled out a knife and stabbed Kiran multiple times.
Oh my gosh.
Before fleeing the scene, he just left her there bleeding and alone to die.
It's just such a horrific act of violence. And, it's important to emphasize the brutality of it, the sheer rage that fueled the attack.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about silencing her. It was about punishing her for rejecting him, for daring to defy his twisted sense of control.
Absolutely. The brutality just really speaks volumes about the perpetrator's state of mind.
Yeah.
It was a very deliberate act of cruelty, just designed to inflict pain and terror.
People who were passing by found Kiran and rushed her to the hospital, but tragically her injuries were too severe. She didn't survive.
Yeah, her death just sent shock waves through the entire community. This
Yeah.
young woman, so full of life and promise, was suddenly gone,
Yeah.
It was a stark reminder that stalking is not just some harmless annoyance.
Right.
It's a dangerous crime with potentially fatal consequences.
And it wasn't just about Kiran, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this was about all the women who were stalked and harassed every day, living in fear, often feeling like their voices aren't heard.
Exactly. Kiran's case really became a symbol, a tragic representation of a much larger problem.
Yeah.
And it sparked outrage and demands for justice and a call for change. I mean, the aftermath of Kiran's murder just saw a city in mourning and a police force under immense pressure to bring her killer to justice.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been such a chaotic time. The community was reeling from this horrific act, and there was this overwhelming demand for answers and accountability.
Yeah, the pressure was immense, but the police acted swiftly and launched this full-scale investigation to apprehend Akash Singh, who had gone into hiding.
Okay, so let's talk about the investigation. How did they build their case against Akash?
Sure.
What were the key pieces of evidence that led to his arrest?
Well, the investigators had several strong leads to work with right off the bat. One of the most crucial elements was eyewitness testimony. Multiple people had witnessed Akash harassing Kiran in the weeks leading up to the murder.
So it wasn't just about placing at the scene of the crime.
Right.
These eyewitnesses could corroborate Kiran's claims of being stalked, right?
Yes.
Establishing this pattern of obsessive behavior.
Yeah, their accounts painted a very clear picture of Akash's escalating obsession with Kiran. And alongside the eyewitness testimonies, investigators also uncovered a significant amount of digital evidence.
Yeah, this is where the digital age really plays a role in modern investigations.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to commit a crime these days without leaving some sort of digital footprint.
You're absolutely right, and in Akash's case, that digital footprint proved to be damning. Investigators were able to retrieve a series of messages and social media interactions between him and Kiran.
Okay, so what did those messages reveal? Was it just unwanted contact, or was there something more sinister?
Well, the messages painted a pretty chilling picture of Akash's obsessive mindset. They were filled with unwanted advances, veiled threats, and just this disturbing sense of ownership over Kiran. Wow.
It provided really concrete evidence of his state of mind and his escalating obsession.
So we have eyewitnesses placing him at the scene, a clear motive established through his history of stalking,
Right.
and this digital evidence confirming his obsession and threats.
Yeah.
That's already a pretty strong case.
It was, and it became even more compelling when Akash was finally apprehended 3 days after the crime.
Okay, where did they find him? Was he trying to flee the city?
He was apprehended in a neighboring town.
Okay.
It seemed like he was trying to escape to evade justice,
Yeah.
but the police were relentless in their pursuit.
So his attempt to flee only added to the growing mountain of evidence against him.
Right.
What happened when he was finally brought in for questioning?
Well, faced with the overwhelming evidence against him,
Yeah.
and perhaps driven by a mix of guilt and a realization that the game was up,
Yeah.
Akash confessed to the crime during interrogation.
Wow. A confession at that point, it seems like there was no doubt left about his guilt. You're right. The confession, combined with the other evidence, painted a very clear picture of what had transpired.
Yeah.
The focus then shifted to the trial
Yeah.
and what justice would look like for Kiran and her family.
The trial began in late 2012, given the high-profile nature of the case. I imagine it garnered a lot of media attention.
It did. The trial became a focal point for discussions about women's safety, stalking, and the urgent need for stricter laws to protect victims.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire nation was watching, waiting to see what would happen.
Okay, so let's talk about the trial itself. What were the key arguments presented by both the prosecution and the defense?
Well, the prosecution built their case around the concept of premeditation.
Okay.
They argued that Akash's actions were not a spontaneous act of passion,
Yeah.
but rather the culmination of months of planning and obsessive behavior.
So they were trying to prove that he had intentionally planned to murder Kiran.
Yes, exactly. They pointed to the history of stalking, threatening messages, and even the choice of location for the attack as evidence of his premeditation. They argued that he had carefully considered his actions and chosen a place where Kiran would be vulnerable.
That makes sense. They were essentially saying that he had been building up to this act for months, and the attack itself was a calculated decision.
Precisely. And the defense, of course, had a very different strategy. They attempted to portray the crime as a crime of passion,
Okay.
a sudden act driven by an uncontrollable fit of rage and jealousy.
So they were trying to downplay the stalking aspect and portray Akash as someone who simply snapped at a moment of emotional turmoil.
Right. They argued that Akash wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but rather a man who had become consumed by his emotions and acted impulsively.
Yeah.
They were hoping to secure a less severe sentence by arguing that the crime wasn't premeditated.
It seems like a difficult argument to make given all the evidence of premeditation presented by the prosecution.
It was, and the court ultimately rejected that argument. The judge, after carefully considering all the evidence, concluded that Akash's actions were indeed premeditated, deliberate, and driven by this dangerous obsession that he had allowed to spiral out of control.
So what was the verdict? What was the price of justice for Kiran's life?
In 2013, Akash Singh was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment.
Life imprisonment. That's a significant sentence. It sends a strong message that stalking and the violence it can lead to are not taken lightly by the courts.
It does. The verdict was seen as a victory for justice, a recognition of the severity of stalking and its potential to escalate into violence.
Yeah.
It was also a powerful message to potential stalkers that their actions will have severe consequences.
But while the verdict brought some measure of closure, Kiran's case also highlighted a much larger problem, didn't it?
Yeah.
It sparked conversations about the need for broader societal change, for better systems to protect potential victims of stalking.
Absolutely. Kiran's tragedy forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about the prevalence of stalking, the inadequacy of existing laws. And the cultural attitudes that often downplay or excuse this dangerous behavior,
Right.
it became a catalyst for change, for a reevaluation of how we as a society address the issue of stalking and protect those who are vulnerable. I think Kiran's case, as tragic as it is, served as a real wake-up call. You know, it forced us to confront this reality of stalking, its devastating consequences, and just the urgent need for change.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things we can do is just raise awareness about what stalking actually is.
Right.
You know, it's not just some harmless infatuation.
Yeah.
It's a pattern of behavior that is unwanted, repetitive,
Yeah.
and often terrifying for the victim.
Absolutely. Stalking can take so many forms.
Yeah.
And it goes far beyond just physical following. You know, it can include unwanted phone calls, messages, emails,
Right.
social media harassment, showing up uninvited at someone's work or home,
Yeah.
even spreading rumors or using technology to track someone's movements.
It's that intentionality, that sense of control and intrusion. That makes it so disturbing.
Yeah.
And it's something that often escalates over time, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Stalking rarely starts with these grand, overtly threatening gestures, you know.
Right.
It often begins very subtly with seemingly small acts that might even be dismissed as harmless.
Yeah.
But the key is the repetition, the persistence, and the impact it has on the victim.
Yeah.
You know, it's about chipping away at someone's sense of safety and autonomy.
So if someone suspects they are being stalked, what are the first steps they should take? Who can they turn to for help?
Well, the most important thing is to trust your instincts.
Okay.
If you feel threatened or unsafe, you're probably right. Don't dismiss your feelings or try to rationalize the stalker's behavior.
Yeah.
Reach out to someone you trust, a friend, a family member, a therapist, an advocate.
Okay.
It's crucial to have a support system in place.
And what about documenting the stalking? Is that important?
Absolutely. Documenting everything can be really crucial if you decide to report the stalking to the police. Save messages, keep a log of incidents, take screenshots, anything that can help establish a pattern of behavior and provide evidence.
Yeah.
This documentation can be invaluable in building a case.
And speaking of reporting to the police, what role do law enforcement agencies play in protecting victims of stalking? What can be done to improve their response to these cases?
Well, the role of law enforcement is critical, but there's definitely room for improvement in how they handle stalking cases.
Right.
Often victims feel like their concerns aren't taken seriously,
Right.
or that there isn't enough evidence to pursue charges.
Yeah.
So we need to see more training for law enforcement officers on stalking dynamics,
Okay.
the importance of early intervention, and the psychological impact on victims.
So it's not just about responding to incidents after they occurred,
Right.
but about recognizing the warning signs and taking proactive steps to prevent escalation.
Exactly, and that requires this multifaceted approach. We need to educate the public about what stalking is, how to recognize it, and how to respond. We need to train professionals who might encounter stalking victims, like teachers, healthcare workers, social workers,
Right.
to identify the signs and provide support.
Yeah.
And perhaps most importantly, we need to create a culture where victims feel safe and empowered to come forward without fear of judgment or disbelief.
Yeah, it's about shifting the entire conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Moving away from blaming the victim and towards holding perpetrators accountable for their actions.
Precisely.
Hmm.
It's about challenging those societal norms that often downplay or excuse stalking behavior.
Yeah.
We need to stop romanticizing obsessive behavior in movies and popular culture
Right.
and start recognizing it as the dangerous red flag that it is.
Absolutely. We need to promote healthy relationships based on respect, boundaries, and consent.
Yeah.
And we need to create a system where victims feel supported, believed, and protected.
Well said. I think Kiran Choudhary's case, while a heartbreaking tragedy, brought this issue of stalking into the national spotlight. And her story serves as a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession
Absolutely.
and the urgent need for change.
It's a story that should compel us all to act,
Yeah.
to educate ourselves, to support victims, and to work towards creating a society where stalking is not tolerated, excused, or minimized,
Right.
but is recognized and addressed for the serious crime that it is.
I agree with you there.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a truly thought-provoking conversation.
It has been. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, if you or someone you know is experiencing stalking, please remember that you are not alone. There are resources available to help reach out to a trusted friend, family member, or seek help from organizations dedicated to supporting victims of stalking. If you found this deep dive into the Kiran Choudhary case insightful, we encourage you to subscribe to CrimePod Castle for more compelling true crime stories and discussion. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for exclusive content and behind-the-scenes looks at the cases we cover. Until next time, stay safe and stay informed.